And this might be the deepest league in the entire sport when it comes to how many teams can make the playoff. I have 9 this year. 9. Hello and welcome in. It's always college football. I'm your host, Greg McElroy, and we appreciate you being here from wherever it is you're coming to us from. Whether that's via the ESPN podcast platform, if it's the ESPN College Football YouTube channel, wherever you're getting it, if it's on the podcast, just go ahead and subscribe. Always College Football with Greg McElroy, doing a couple episodes a week for the most part throughout the offseason. But as we start to get a little bit closer to the fall, we will start to increase that number of episodes per week, peaking with 4 episodes a week in the fall on Sunday, Monday, Wednesday, and on Thursday. Today's a great show. I love when we get to this time of the year here, early July. We're getting ready to have Big 12 Media Days here momentarily. So we figured we would kick things off with our Tiers series. We did this last year. I think a lot of people liked it. It gives people hope. It gives people optimism. And in some cases, it gives people disappointment. But for the most part here at Always College Football, we're always trying to see it through the perspective of glass half full. We will do that today with the Big 12. We take every single team in the league and we give a small breakdown, in some cases maybe a little bit more extreme breakdown, and then we kind of put them in the tiers. All right, here's the national championship contenders. That's tier 1. Tier 2, college football playoff contenders. Tier 3, spoilers, dark horses that could still win the league. Bowl-bound teams is tier 4. That means teams we fully expect to get to 6 wins this year, and then teams that are currently a work in progress that could certainly get to a bowl game, could certainly get to a point in which they're a spoiler, but at this point, there's just too many unknowns. So that's what we'll do today with the Big 12, and it's a fascinating league. For a while now, it's been one of the most entertaining leagues in all of college football. Why? Because it's the widest league in college football. There is not the obvious annual national championship contender. It's kind of year to year. You're not really 100% sure what you're going to get. That's why you have teams like Arizona State last year that were picked to finish 9th in the preseason, 10th in the preseason, 15th in the preseason, according to some publications. And then they ultimately end up winning the league. And by the way, give Texas all they want in the college football playoffs. So this is one of my favorite leagues to cover. It's also going to be one of our probably most fun leagues to put into tiers. So let's kick things off with tier 1, national championship contenders for the Big 12. Tier 1 in the Big 12. Tier 1, national championship contenders. The teams that I think can go and win the whole dang thing, hoist the trophy at the end of the 12-team playoff as the number 1 team in the sport. How many Big 12 teams are in it this year? That would be 0, just like last year. No disrespect to the Big 12. I think the Big 12 is an elite league as far as the amount of diversity that we have in the league, the styles that we have in the league, the different terrains that we have in the league in some cases, everything from mountain to desert to the flatlands of Texas to, Dublin, Ireland this year. Obviously not a home game for Kansas State or Iowa State, but an interesting game nonetheless, and we will get to it here in just a little bit. But I look at the league as a whole. How many teams in the league, in my eyes, can win at least 3 consecutive games against some of the best teams in the sport, some of the most stockpiled rosters in the sport? Do I think an Arizona State can win 1 game in the postseason? Absolutely. Could they potentially win 2? Perhaps. Do I think they could win 3? And in some cases, do I think they could win 4, especially now looking at the postseason format where it's going to be seeded 1 through 12? Likely, the Big 12 is going to have to play 4 games en route to winning a national championship. Can they win 4 in a row? I have a hard time envisioning a scenario right now that says yes. But even though there's not a tier 1 team this year, there are a bunch of tier 2 teams. And we qualify tier 2 as college football playoff contenders, teams that can make the playoff. And this might be the deepest league in the entire sport when it comes to how many teams can make the playoff. I have 9 this year. 9. teams out of the Big 12 that I really believe could make the college football playoff. If they made a run, if they stayed healthy, if all the things fell into place, they win their toss-up games, they could easily see themselves in that 12-team field at season's end. So we will kick things off with the team that at this point I feel best about, and that is the Texas Tech Red Raiders. Now, if you look at the Red Raiders this year, there's a lot of people that are looking at this season and are defining it as championship or bust. This is the year in which they've pushed their chips all into the center of the table. And who can really blame them? You look at what they've done in the offseason, and we'll get to that in a moment, but it kind of seems like this might be the year. If not now, then when for the Red Raiders? You got Baron Morton back at quarterback, which is massive. He, of course, has a bunch of new weapons at his disposal. The big key with Baron Morton, he's got to be healthy. He has to get through this season at 100%. You got great leadership at the second level defensively. Jacob Rodriguez is back. Ben Roberts is back. Both at linebacker, guys are productive, guys that have a good feel for the system. You look at how aggressive they've been in going after players in the transfer portal. It's probably the biggest reason why I and many others feel great about the Red Raiders this year, because they went out and they spent a ton of money in NIL. And as a result, they have completely overhauled their defensive line. This was a massive point of emphasis coming into the season, because the defense last year kind of struggled with applying pressure to the opposing quarterback, and they gave up a bunch of explosive plays. You go out, you go and get 4 guys at least along the defensive line that have played high-level football at other places in the past. That should improve depth, that should improve quality, and that should give them a better chance to make some interesting moves on that side of the ball. But the offensive line has also experienced quite a bit of resurgence as well. You go out and add some veteran pieces, and you got to feel in a pretty good spot for the most part to take a considerable step. Now, you look at some of the additions at skill and some of the other places that you have to replace in production. There are a couple things that might need to be ironed out there, but I feel good overall about the improvements along both lines of scrimmage, improvement that you're likely going to get at quarterback with another year from Baron Morton, and some of the additions that you made in the portal at some of the skill position spots. Look at the schedule. Also a huge factor when it comes to evaluating these teams and college football playoff candidacy. I think a 9-3 team this year could easily win the Big 12 because there's just so much parity in the league. I look at some of their toughest games at Kansas State. That'll be on November 1st. Probably one of the toughest games on the schedule. You're on the road. Kansas State's always a team that's right there in the mix at season's end. When you look at them, they're always 8-9 wins. They're in the middle of November. That's going to be a massive game. Texas Tech also has to go to Arizona State. That's on October 18th. Now, Arizona State last year, of course, a tremendous season, went on to go and do things that many thought were not possible last year. But here they are now in a great spot to back up what they already accomplished last year at Utah on September 20th. I think Utah bounces back in a big way this year. You're at altitude. It's in September, so it's not going to be overly cold, but still a challenging environment to play in nonetheless. And then you have BYU on November 8th, another very tricky game for the Red Raiders. There's a reason why I really like them this year. I think the schedule's for the most part manageable, and I love some of the additions that they've made on both sides of the ball, including some of the coaching changes that have also transpired on the defensive side as well. So really optimistic and bullish on the Red Raiders this year. They are squarely in Tier 2 as a college football playoff contender. Moving next to team number 2 in tier number 2, and it's the Kansas State Wildcats. I think we're going to get explosive quarterback play from Avery Johnson this year. Last year, you could sense first-year starter, expectations were high. There were some great moments, and there were some moments that were somewhat subpar. He's a year older. He's a full-time starter. He's going to be more comfortable naturally, probably more confident. And some of the flashes that we saw last year, I think we might see those with a little more regularity. I think he's on the cusp of a potential breakout this year. And I think he's kind of flying under the radar, frankly, when looking at some of the guys that are coming back for this Kansas State team. He's got a great backfield to lean on. Dylan Edwards is back after a really strong 2024 campaign at running back. You go out and you get a couple more additions to increase the depth that you have at running back. That should make things a little bit better. I like that they've addressed what was, I think, an inconsistent wide receiver core last year throughout. You go out and get Bradley from Texas Tech, who played, I think, really good football for them last year. You get Jaron Tibbs, Caleb Bedford, a few other guys that have now come in and have kind of increased the depth there, increased the weaponry there at wide receiver, and you got a veteran offensive line as well. I mean, this will require maybe a few new additions. You bring out a key returner from Ohio State and George Fitzpatrick. You have a few other guys there, guard to guard, that you feel pretty good about. And then on the defensive side, they're always really, really stout. They're going to be strong along the defensive line. They're extremely talented at linebacker with Austin Romaine being back. You also bring in a linebacker transfer from Alabama, Jay Sean Ross, and Ohio State transfer, and Gabe Powers. So they're going to have really talented pieces there at the second level. The secondary, maybe a bit of a liability last year from time to time, but I believe the coaching continuity and just improved play there should allow this team to reach its potential. I look at the schedule. I think it's one of the toughest schedules in the entire Big 12. You have to play against Iowa State. That's going to be in Dublin on August 23rd. So it's a bit of a unique schedule where you have multiple bye weeks in different places. You have to go all the way over to Dublin to play in what is a very, very critical game there in week 0. So you better be operating at full tilt week 0, because if you're not, now you're going to be a game and a half back if you lose to Iowa State. That is a team that played in the Big 12 championship game last year. So I think that's a massive game. You're at Utah on November 22nd. That'll be late in the year. Rice-Eccles State is one of the toughest places to play in the entire league. And I think Utah is a team that's going to be vastly improved. You're at Kansas in the Sunflower Showdown. It's going to be an intense matchup. I expect Kansas to bounce back in a big way this year. You'll find out more on them here in just a little bit. So I think that's a challenging game. I do think there's a massive pothole that exists there at Oklahoma State on November 15th. You got November 22nd, you're at Utah. Utah's going to be in the mix. The week before, you're on the road at T-Boone Pickens Stadium. Not an easy place to play, especially with where it lies on the schedule. And then you're also at Baylor in early October. You have to go to Arizona. Texas Tech comes to you, so that makes it somewhat more manageable. But I still think this schedule is incredibly difficult from top to bottom. Still love the personnel, love the coaching continuity, and will always, I mean, I can't see a scenario right now. As long as Chris Kleiman's there, I'm not sure there will ever be a scenario where Kansas State is not in tier 2 in the Big 12. I think they can always make a run. I think they can always win the league. And that's why if you win the league, you're in the college football playoff. We'll go next to team number 3, and that is the Arizona State Sun Devils. Now, last year, they go and they win the Big 12 in remarkable fashion. They have a tremendous postseason performance, the best postseason performance amongst all the teams that played for the first time in the second round of the playoffs. Remember, the other 3 teams got off to really, really slow starts. Arizona State did too, but they bounced back emphatically and almost won that game against the Texas Longhorns. They bring back a ton of production. They returned 17 starters overall from the championship run a year ago, but the most important starters, their quarterback, Sam Levitt. Breakout year last year, went for nearly 3,000 yards, had a tremendous impact, I think, on making every single person around him better. And I believe the sky's the limit for this young man. For those that have been watching the podcast, I think he's a top 3, top 5 quarterback in all of college football coming back this year. And by season's end, I think some people will start to acknowledge, all right, this guy's got next level potential as a possible franchise quarterback. I think he's mobile. I think he's got plenty of arm. I think he plays the game with a certain savvy that's hard to find here early in their career. But now he's no longer young. He's a polished and seasoned veteran. I expect big things from Sam Levitt this year. I also expect big things from his top wide receiver option, Jordan Tyson. He had a great year last year. And when he went out there towards the end, his loss was certainly felt. I mean, he was the go-to guy in the red zone. He was the go-to guy on third down. His production was off the charts. So him now being back fully healthy is massive. And they also have a really veteran offensive line as well that should be one of the best in all of college football. Defensively, they bring a ton of production back. The one area that they struggled with was generating regular pass pressure. They couldn't really get after the quarterback all the time when it comes to pass rush situations, but they were stout, I think, in many areas, and that continuity with all that production back will be really, really helpful for this Arizona State team. I also like a few of the transfer portal additions. I love that they went out and got Kane Udoh from Army. He was an 1,100-yard rusher last year to replace Cam Scatteraboo there in the backfield at running back. Remember last year, a huge problem was the kicking game. Field goal kicking suffered, extra points suffered. They go out and they get Jesus Gomez from Eastern Michigan. That was a big weakness on last year's team. And they've also addressed some of their issues from a depth standpoint. I love the culture that's being created by Kenny Dillingham. And I think that culture, even though people are kind of telling them how great they are this offseason, they'll find that edge, they'll find that chip on their shoulder, and you'll get great performances week in, week out from the Arizona State Sun Devils. The schedule's tough. You host Texas Tech on October 18th. I think Texas Tech's one of the better teams in the league. You're at Utah on October 11th. That's a really tough spot to be in. You're at Iowa State on November 1st. So you think about that. Two of those three teams, some of the best teams in the league, two of the three you're on the road against. Tricky spot to be in. I am very high on Baylor. They have to go to Waco to take on the Baylor Bears. That's on September 20th. They're at Colorado late in the year on November 22nd. If Arizona was playing at Colorado, or if Arizona State was playing at Colorado in, say, September as opposed to November 22nd, might feel a little differently about that game. And they also have a pivotal non-conference game against an SEC team by going to Mississippi State on September 6th. So I think it's a very difficult schedule, a tougher schedule this year than it was a year ago, but there's proof of concept and there's a real belief around Arizona State's program that still has me feeling really good about what the Sun Devils might be able to accomplish this year. On next to team number 4, and it's the Iowa State Cyclones. You got to feel great about the continued progression of Rocco Beck at quarterback. Guy has been the cornerstone the last couple of years. He's going into now his third year as a starting quarterback. He's seen it all. He's felt it all. And he's arguably one of the more productive quarterbacks in Iowa State history, which is saying an awful lot given some of the good ones that they've had in the last few years. He's thrown for over 6,600 yards. He's thrown for nearly 50 touchdowns in his career. And I think that he kind of can serve as the catalyst, that solid, strong point, that coach on the field type of mentality, a guy that can just manage the game, manage the people, but can make exceptional plays when it's asked of him. They will also have a really veteran group along the offensive line. They return a ton of production, a ton of returning starts that we've seen from a lot of those guys, so that should be really helpful. I love their running back room. Carson Hansen, who did a great job last year to be kind of married up with Abu Sama. Those two guys as a 1-2 punch should be one of the better tandems in all of the Big 12. And while there are some questions along the defensive front as far as generating pressure on the opposing quarterback, they had just 17 sacks in 14 games last year. John Heacock, their defensive coordinator, is going to make sure that that group is sound from top to bottom. I love Matt Campbell. I think he's phenomenal. I love some of the pieces that they went out and got after in the portal. So I think there's reason to believe that this group has a chance to be really, really good. Now, I will admit, I am a little concerned about having to replace the outstanding duo that was Jaden Higgins and Jalen Noel at wide receiver. Those two combined for over 2,300 yards and 17 touchdowns last year. Those two being gone means that they're going to have to replace those guys with proven production, but guys that produced at other places with some of the transfers that they brought in at that spot. You bring in Chase Sowell from East Carolina, Xavier Townsend from UCF. These are guys that have played and have had success in college football, but they haven't done it at Iowa State. That is the one question mark for me when looking at this team this year. They have Kansas State in that incredible Week 0 showdown over there in Dublin, Ireland. That'll be awesome. They have Arizona State who comes to them. They're at Oklahoma State. Be careful there. That's the final game of the regular season. Having to go on the road against a team that might have nothing to lose will be incredibly difficult. They're also at TCU. That, I think, is another tough game. I think TCU bounces back in a big way this year, and they're at Colorado on October 11th. It's always tough to go on the road and play at altitude in Boulder. You got Iowa on September 6th. Of course, that won't have a huge bearing on their playoff prospects because I'm not sure at this point. I feel real confident in a Big 12 team that doesn't win the Big 12 getting in. But if they can win that one, it would give them a little bit of flexibility. Maybe they could finish second or third in the Big 12 and still make the college football playoff. They can get that game against Iowa in the Cy-Hawk Trophy game on September 6th. And they have Arizona at home on September 27th, another game that I think they should be able to handle. So looking at that, I really like Iowa State this year. I think there's great stability with Iowa State as long as they can kind of figure out, all right, how will they be as good at wide receiver as they were a year ago? Team number 5, the Utah Utes. Now, a lot of people will look at this and say, well, hang on a second. They're coming off a 5-7 season, and you have them as a legitimate college football playoff contender. Well, I ask you this question. 2 teams that made the college football playoff last year finished with sub 500 records the year before. Arizona State is one, the other is Indiana. It is possible in today's day and age to go from the outhouse to the penthouse. You can do it because of how quickly you can flip your roster. And I think Kyle Whittingham has a great feel for where we're at in college football right now. And I believe that he can get things ironed out for this team that had some ups and downs, partly because I'm a believer in their quarterback. They go out and they evaluated the entire landscape, and they decided that Devin Dampier, a transfer from New Mexico, is the right guy for them. The guy is electric. He can run it, he can throw it, he can extend plays, he can make off-schedule plays, and he can make an offensive line that I think has a chance to be elite. He can make that offensive line even better by introducing a little bit more consistent quarterback run. That's an area in which I'm very intrigued to see, just philosophically, offense, how are they going to change their scheme? Because if you listen to moving on from Andy Ludwig, you bring in Jason Beck, it sounds like they're going to be a little bit more tempo. It sounds like they're going to be utilizing RPO a little bit heavier. And I think that could lead to more explosive offense, which could make them a real problem when married up with this offensive line that could certainly be bruisers across the board. I like the defense. I think the defense is always strong at Utah, but there are some really pivotal pieces from last year that need to be replaced. They go out and they have plenty of proven talent at linebacker. That's not the position I'm concerned about whatsoever, but there are some depth questions at defensive tackle. There are a couple depth questions at corner. Either way, I look at Utah and I still am always going to feel pretty good about what they put on the field on that side of the ball. And frankly, if their offense scores a lot more points, their defense doesn't have to be a top 10, top 15, top 20 unit in this country. They don't have to be there, especially if their offense is scoring 40. So granted, might feel a little different, might feel a little weird as someone that's watched Utah football for a long time. But if they're a little more offense-centric, that's okay if they have some pieces that need to iron themselves out on the defensive side. We'll go to the schedule. Schedule's tough. Kansas State on November 22nd. Very difficult game, but at least it is at home. They have Texas Tech at home as well. That's on September 20th. That'll be an interesting game. I love those two teams, both of which go to Utah, but they are at Arizona State on October 11th. That'll be a very tough game. Maybe the toughest game on the schedule for the Utah Utes this year if you don't consider the game at BYU on October 18th as a massive hurdle as well. I really like BYU this year. I always like BYU, but those two games back-to-back, Arizona State on the 11th, BYU on the 18th, very, very tricky. And then a kind of an under-the-radar game in the non-conference at UCLA on August 30th. UCLA will be featuring a new offense led by a new quarterback in Nico Iamaleava. So we'll see if that game can kind of tell us all we need to know about the Utah Utes this year. You're at West Virginia, you're at Baylor, you're at Kansas. So there are 3 difficult road games on the schedule for the Utah Utes, but I think their toughest games are at home, which makes me feel a little bit better about what this team might be able to accomplish this year. We'll move next to the Baylor Bears. And if you look at where this team was, how many people right now would have said that Baylor in 2025 would be in tier 2 category in the Big 12 after a 2-4 start to the 2024 season? A lot of people might have thought that Dave Aranda wouldn't even be there at this point, given how they started the season just a year ago, but how they finished the season has me feeling like there's some momentum that's been created within the program. They finished 6 in a row in the regular season. They finished 8-5 overall. They get the bowl game. Of course, they didn't win the bowl game, but either way, to finish with that type of flurry has me feeling pretty good. And part of the reason why they finished as well as they did is they found that quarterback in Sawyer Robertson that could very much take them to the next level. He threw for over 3,000 yards last year. I think it's some of the things he does. I think he's a top 10 quarterback in the country coming back. I think he's flying under the radar in many people's projections about what great quarterback play might look like this upcoming year. Remember, last year, he wasn't even the day 1 starter. So to play as well as he did down the stretch, when not getting all those first team reps in the offseason, when having to share time at points in the early part of the season, now it's his show. He's the one that's going to drive the car, and that's got to have you feel pretty good about what this team might be. Offensively around him, they bring so much back. Now, this was a group that had over 440 yards of total offensive game last year. So it's a group that's already produced at a high level, but now they might even be a little bit better with some of the continuity that's been created for offensive coordinator Jake Spavital. Really encouraged by some of the pieces they added in the portal. They go out and they get Josh Cameron, who I think is the deep threat. He's been there, but you go out and get Kobe Prentice from Alabama, who's expected to be a massive contributor as well at wide receiver, and the offensive line should be pretty dang good as well. You have a really, really talented backfield in Bryson Washington. I love what Bryson Washington can do this year, but him and Dawson Pendergrass, they combined for nearly 1,700 yards last year. You do have to iron out a couple things on defense, but they have gone out and been very aggressive and intentional in trying to bring in guys from big-time programs like Ohio State, Northwestern, Oregon, A&M. You go out and get pieces from schools like that. That makes you feel like they're going to have strong talent across the board. It's just whether or not they can find that continuity. But Dave Aranda is one of the best defensive minds in the sport. I think he'll be able to figure it out with some of the new pieces that he has to play with. It's a tough schedule. I feel like all these schedules, by the way, are extremely difficult. But Auburn in the non-conference, I think Auburn's a significantly improved team from a year ago. This will be a great test on August 29th to figure out exactly where Auburn is and to figure out exactly where Baylor is. They'll get that game at home, and that's a massive opportunity for Baylor to start the season off on the right foot. They'll host last year's champion in Arizona State on September 20th. So there in the first 2 or 3 weeks, you're kind of going to need to know, hey, this is kind of where Baylor's at with some of the teams they'll have to face there early on, but it does not get much easier as things move along. They also have SMU on September 6th. So you get 3 teams, man, those first 3 or 4 weeks that are going to give you a real good indicator of what is possible for this team moving forward. You got Kansas State on October 4th. You're at TCU on October 18th. You're at Utah on November 15th. And then you still have road trips to Arizona, who might be problematic at that point by November 22nd, or at Oklahoma State. That game's on September 27th. I think Oklahoma State could be a vastly improved team this year. So if stars align, I could see Baylor making a run and picking up where they left off down the stretch last year. But they do have to figure out a few things, especially on the defensive side. Moving next to the Kansas Jayhawks, another team that was very disappointing in the win-loss record from a year ago. But when you dive just a little bit deeper, there's a lot of people that believe Kansas can be back in the mix. Their win total sits at 7.5, which is not great. But in the Big 12, you might only need 8 or 9 to get to the Big 12 championship game, depending on how much chaos there could be throughout the regular season standings. And if you look at where they were last year, I don't ever pay super close attention to close losses, but the ball bounced away from Kansas last year. I mean, all throughout the season, it's like everything that could go wrong did, and it led to 5 losses by 6 points or less. Sometimes that has a way of overcorrecting the following year, and they learn how to finish games. They learn how to avoid that critical mistake, and all of a sudden they become a much better team when it comes to playing in those close games. Jalen Daniels is back at quarterback. That's massive. He has to stay healthy. That's imperative. If he can't stay healthy, then any projections that you're making from Kansas, you can drop the win total significantly. But if he is healthy, he's one of the more dynamic playmakers in all of college football. You got some offensive continuity. You do lose your OC from last year in Jeff Grimes, but Jim Jabrowski, he's been around a little bit. He has seen it. He has done it. And you also have Matt Lubick there as a co-offensive coordinator to kind of help things out. The offensive line should be pretty good. They bring back quality pieces from guard to guard with their center, Bryce Foster, who should be one of the better centers in the Big 12 this year. Yes, you lose Devin Neal, all-time leading rusher in the history of the school, but they have tons of talent in the backfield with the addition of LaShawn Williams from Iowa and Daniel Highshaw, who's been good for a really long time. If he can stay healthy, they could be in a really good spot. They've also been really, really good at going out and finding pieces in the portal that could be really solid. They've added 27 players from last year. They've focused on needs, they've focused on depth, and they've really tried to emphasize the defensive side along the defensive line and at wide receiver. They go out and got a handful of guys at wide receiver that can immediately help them. One from Alabama and Emmanuel Henderson, one from Ball State, and that should help kind of ease the transition on from their top three receivers from a year ago. You have to love very much what Lance Leipold's done. Now, they lost some really good pieces in the back end defensively. Lance Leipold went out and made that a priority, and I think Lance Leipold's one of the better minds in college football as far as figuring out, all right, here's how we're going to attack this. Here's what we're going to do with this. He's a great planner, has a bunch of national championships at Wisconsin Whitewater to show for it. The schedule's tough, but at Missouri on September 6th, probably the most anticipated game on the Kansas schedule this year, the border showdown rivalry. We haven't seen it since 2011. To have it back on the schedule this year is good for all of us as college football fans. They're at Texas Tech on October 11th. They have Kansas State coming to them on October 25th. They're at Iowa State on November 2nd. They have Utah at home on November 28th. So think about, those are some massive games there in the Big 12 that are kind of scattered throughout, but there's some time in between. It's not like they have back-to-backs that are going to really stress you out if you're a Kansas Jayhawk fan, but you also go to Arizona, you go to UCF, so there's some tricky hurdle games in there as well. But I think Kansas has a chance. Last year, maybe we got a little over our skis with anticipating a huge jump from the Jayhawks last year to become a possible college football playoff contender. Maybe we're a year early. Maybe this is the year where things start to iron out for Lance Leipold and his team. We'll go next to the BYU Cougars, a great season a year ago and a lot to potentially build on from what was established last year. But let's look at the quarterback situation for now. It looked like they were going to have a very experienced quarterback back with Jake Retzlaff. He has since decided to enter the transfer portal. We're not going to go into the details of that situation whatsoever. But what I do want to evaluate is what is still there for BYU at quarterback. Because I look at the rest of the roster, we'll get to them in a minute. The rest of the roster is ready-made and established to go and contend for the Big 12 title yet again. This team has a lot of depth along the lines of scrimmage. They have really solid secondary play in the back end defensively. They should be pretty dang good at running back to at least take some pressure off what might be a somewhat inexperienced quarterback, but they have some options. So they went out and they've added a couple guys the last few years in the portal. They did so again this year. McKay Hillestad, redshirt sophomore, he transferred from Utah State, does have starting experience at the FBS level. He's likely the kind of the front runner alongside Trayson Bourget, who transferred over from Western Michigan. Like I said, both guys have played, but the wild card is Bear Bachmeier, who, among all the quarterbacks in the stable for BYU, probably has the highest ceiling. So with the returning experience around him, do they feel comfortable enough putting a young freshman quarterback out there in Bachmeier behind what should be one of the best offensive lines in the entire Big 12? The schedule, I think if you look at it, there are some real challenging games, but there also are some good opportunities as well. They host Utah. They're on October 18th. Getting that game at home is massive. They're at Colorado on September 27th. Colorado's a bunch of question marks, probably still very talented, but a ton of question marks. So that'll be a good, interesting road test early. They're in late September. They are at Texas Tech, a team that I really like this year. That'll be a really challenging game. They're at Iowa State on October 25th. That'll be a tough game. And then TCU comes to them. That'll be on November 15th. And who knows exactly what the weather might look like at that point. So TCU pass-happy offense. If, in fact, it's snowing sideways, I don't think it will be. But if it is, that would be massive advantage in favor of BYU. They're at Arizona. They have West Virginia that comes to them. So there's some challenging games for sure. But I think top to bottom, you got to feel pretty good about what the schedule looks like for the BYU Cougars. Last but certainly not least, it's team number 9 that is in our Tier 2 category. And Tier 2 is national championship contenders, not so much, but college football playoff contenders. I think TCU can make the playoff this year. Part of my reason for optimism is that you have Josh Hoover back at quarterback. He had a tremendous year last year statistically. You have great stability along the offensive line in certain spots. I think the run game will hopefully take a pretty significant step forward. That was a bit of a point of contention last year. And if that part can take some of the pressure off the passing attack, this is a group that just couldn't really get a whole lot going last year. You bring in Kavorian Barnes from UTSA, should provide an instant boost to the running back room. I think that group has a chance to be really good. And they did lose some quality pieces there along the wide receiver core, but you bring in a couple of really talented transfers like Jordan Dwyer from Idaho, who went for over 1,100 yards last year, nearly 1,200 yards. You bring in Joseph Manjack from Houston. That could be really helpful. So you also have a couple of highly touted freshmen that could be impactful within the receiving room as well. And if you look at the recruiting classes that Sonny Dykes has started to stack up, this will be their third straight top 3 Big 12 recruiting class. So this should be a group, as these guys continue to grow and if they can just continue to hold on to the talent, develop the talent, they got a chance to be a whole lot better. They got to be better on the defense. They were struggling in the secondary last year. That should be helpful. They attacked it in the portal some, but this will be a second year now for Andy Avalos as the defensive coordinator. That should provide a little bit of continuity. Looking at the schedule, at Arizona State, at Kansas State, at North Carolina, 3 very difficult games away from home. They do get SMU at home and they have to go to BYU. So I look at this schedule and I just think, man, there's a lot of games on the road that will be tricky, but you also have some other contenders, teams that I really like this year that come to you, like Iowa State. They come to you on November 8th. Baylor comes to you on October 18th. So I think TCU, if they can get better from a balance standpoint offensively, if they can show some growth in the back end defensively, this has kind of the makings of a team that could win some shootouts if the opportunity presents itself. So I do think they are a legitimate college football playoff contender this year, which gives the Big 12 a remarkable 9 teams that I think could legitimately make the playoff this year. I really believe that. It's wild to think about, but it's certainly possible. In our next tier, these are what I call the spoilers. Teams that right now I wouldn't necessarily have in playoff contention, but it would not surprise me if they knocked off one or two teams that are in playoff contention this year. And there's just one in this category from the Big 12, and it's the Colorado Buffaloes. So you have kind of a foundation that was laid by Coach Prime, but now there's just so much turnover. Shedeur Sanders is gone. Obviously, great personnel at wide receiver is gone. But I still look at some of the guys they're able to go get. Caden Salter, transfer from Liberty, whether they have him or Julian Lewis, the talented freshman, whoever it ends up being, they're going to probably be okay at quarterback. I think the offensive line the last couple of years has shown some growth. I'm hopeful that can be a guy that can be a group that they can lean on some. They bring in 26 new commitments from the transfer portal. So they're having to plug and play. But you look at kind of where things are, it's not like it's as much turnover as there was the last couple of years. And the defense, they showed some improvement last year. Now, they were 12 points better per game than they were a year ago. They improved by more than 100 yards of total offense given up a game from where they were in 23. They actually led the Big 12 in tackles for loss and sacks. So there was great growth from 23 to 24. Now it's just having that foundation. Where can they go from here? Like I said, I don't think Colorado at this point is really in the mix to go and win the Big 12 this year. There's just too many teams with more known commodities, but I think they can be a huge spoiler for Utah or Kansas State or hosting Arizona State. You have to go to TCU. You got BYU at your place. So there are some opportunities for Colorado to play the spoiler this year. But as far as contending for the playoff, I just think that's a bridge too far at the moment. We'll go next to our next tier. And these are teams that I fully expect to get to bowl eligibility, but I'm not sure I can see them getting to 8, 9, 10 wins. We'll start with the Cincinnati Bearcats. They actually bring back a lot of production from a year ago. They're 12th in the nation as far as returning production. They're 4th in the Big 12 as far as returning production. I think that continuity is very, very important. You also have quarterback and Brendan Sorsby back as well. Solid 2024 campaign. The offensive line should be really solid. You've revamped the wide receiver room, which should be really helpful. You're really talented at running back, even though you lose Corey Kiner. You bring in the transfer from Wisconsin and Tawi Walker, who's kind of a bulldozer, one-cut runner that can run through an awful lot of contact. And you do, I think, hopefully, if you could stay healthy along the defensive line, you have some pivotal pieces like Dante Corleone, who at defensive tackle is one of the better players in the country at his position. The schedule is tough. At Utah, Nebraska on August 28th. That'll be at Arrowhead Stadium. I'm looking forward to seeing that matchup and just how far Nebraska's come this year. They're at Oklahoma State. They're at TCU. Iowa State comes to them. Then you have Baylor at home, at Kansas, and then you have BYU at home as well. So I kind of look at this schedule, and I do think Cincinnati will be playing in the postseason, but I don't know at this point if they can really contend in the Big 12 this season. UCF is in at number 12. I think they are heading to a bowl game this year. I know this has been kind of a major transformation. I've been bullish on UCF for a while. I still like their program's trajectory. And I feel like last year was just not an indicator of where this team could go here at some point very, very soon. I think you look at the massive roster overhaul headlined by the addition of Scott Frost as their head coach, who everyone wants to look at Scott Frost. Hey, the same recipe that he used en route to tremendous success in 2017, 2018, and beyond. That's all great. 2016, 2017, that's all great, but it's a little bit different landscape nowadays. And that's okay. It doesn't mean UCF can't find success, but I think if he's just going to apply the exact same formula he used last time around, I think it might be a bit more challenging. They should be fine along the offensive line. I feel good about some of the pieces they have there. And while I'm curious to see exactly how it all shakes out at quarterback, whether it's Taven Jackson, who transfers down from Indiana, Cam Fancher, who transfers over from Marshall, Ja'Cory Brown, who's been there now for a couple years, whoever it ends up at quarterback, they should be behind what should be a better offensive line from a year ago. You got to figure out, I think, the defensive line, which should be a strength this year. And I still am a believer in this coaching staff overall. There's a bunch of roster turnover. There's been a bunch of transfers, but still this is a team that can be a problem with some of the speed and athleticism that they have on the field. They're at Kansas State. They're at Texas Tech. They host North Carolina. At Baylor, Oklahoma State comes to them. And then they at BYU. They have Kansas at home, and then they have West Virginia at home. So I think this team is bowl bound, but at this point, it's a little bit tough for me to consider what the ceiling might look like for the UCF Knights this year. We'll go next to the Oklahoma State Cowboys, who I also think will get back to the postseason this year. And there are some people that are very knowledgeable about some of the transfers that have been brought in for Oklahoma State, and they believe that they can be a legitimate contender this year. I'm not there just yet. There's too many unknowns right now. Massive overhaul amongst the staff. You bring in Todd Grantham as the defensive coordinator, who has tremendous experience at Florida, at Georgia, in the NFL, at Alabama. He's been around for a while, so I love that addition. And Doug Meacham is the offensive coordinator, a guy that's going to air raid and go vertical and try to make sure that there's a lot of stress being put on the opposing defense. So I like the coordinator hires, but I don't at this point know exactly what the personnel is going to look like when playing together. I can identify them individually from their previous destination, but collectively, what will it look like? The defense, let's be real, that was the biggest issue the last couple of years. They gave up 1 million yards. They gave up over 35 points a game. They were one of the worst defenses in the Big 12 the last couple of years. Now, if they can get that ironed out and get that group to play better, that should be really helpful. I'm cautiously optimistic about what they have at quarterback. Whether it's redshirt freshman Zane Flores, I think it'll be Haas Henne, who comes in transferring from TCU. I think he's likely to be the guy at this point, but there's just too many unknowns kind of around them to feel great about what things could look like here throughout the season. I think they're bowl bound for sure. I think they have enough talent to go and contend and win at least 6. But after a big culture reset that we've seen this year, it's hard to identify exactly what this team might be able to do on the higher end of the Big 12. Moving on to tier number 5, and these are teams with work to do. At this point, a bowl game would be a success. Doesn't mean that they can't totally prove us all wrong, because I think last year Arizona State might have been in this category. Could have very easily put them in this category last year. They go and make a run and they get to the college football playoff and they give Texas all they want. But these are some teams, there's just 3 of them where there's too many unknowns right now to feel great about what they might be capable of here in this upcoming season. We'll start with the Arizona Wildcats. Now, you get your quarterback back. Noah Fafita's back. He's been around for a while. Did not look anywhere near like the guy he was in 2023 throughout 2024, but he's talented and he's played a lot of football. So that can be extremely helpful. They've gone out and they've gotten some transfer additions. They've signed 11 new offensive linemen, which is huge. You go out and bring in a couple other transfers at running back, and you have some new set of eyes at offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator in Seth Dagey and Danny Gonzalez on offense and defense, respectively. So I'm pretty optimistic this group might collectively be better, but I don't know at this point if I can commit to putting them in the postseason just yet. We'll go next to the Houston Cougars, who I have at number 15. And this is not in any particular order. I'm just counting them, so I make sure I get all the teams. The Houston Cougars, the one reason I think for massive optimism with Houston this year is that you have to look at Willie Fritz's tenure as a head coach. Look, second year is significant. For example, at Tulane, when he got there in 2021, they went 2-10. And then they go 12-2 in 2022. So the expectation is that while things bottomed out last year, in some ways, there were some signs of optimism there in the middle, late part of the season. Can they now take a significant step forward like they did in his last coaching stop at Tulane? You look at the addition of Connor Wigman at Texas from Texas A&M, that could also be massive as well. Now, he was a highly rated recruit. If he could have stayed healthy at Texas A&M, maybe things would be a little bit different. But when he's been on the field, he's been very productive for the Aggies, and now hopefully that production can carry over to Houston. They've totally overhauled the offensive line. They've reinforced the skill positions. They've went out and they've gotten big-time transfers from the defensive side of the football, where they've gone and gotten guys in the back end from LSU, from Auburn, from other places. So hopefully that group collectively can take a step. And then what's become a bit of a theme, all these teams that with work to do, is they've got new coordinators. Slade Nagel, who comes over from LSU, he'll be calling the plays offensively. And Austin Armstrong, he comes over from Florida, has been the defensive coordinator at Florida in the past. He'll be the defensive coordinator there. So hopefully things can work out well for the Houston Cougars this year, but far too many unknowns right now to feel great about guaranteeing them a place in the postseason. And then finally, last but certainly not least, it's the West Virginia Mountaineers. I love the hire of Rich Rodriguez. Absolutely love it. I think it's a massively impactful change. He, of course, brought West Virginia into the world 15, 20 years ago as a legitimate national championship contender every year. He then left, but I think him being back has re-energized the fan base, and people should be very, very excited about what he will build here at some point in the future. I think he's going to win there. Now, a matter of how much, I don't know. But I am a believer in Rich Rodriguez. I'm a believer in what he did in the past. And I do think there are aspects with that energized fan base that could be beneficial to West Virginia moving forward. They've gone out, they've gotten new quarterbacks. I like the transfer from Texas A&M, Jalen Henderson. I think he can be a dynamic piece if used appropriately. They've reinforced the offensive line. You have pretty good depth at running back with Jaheim White, who is back as kind of a centerpiece for this offense, figuring out exactly what things might look like. And then defense coordinator Zach Alley, who was at Oklahoma. I really like the way he attacks and the way he can kind of get after the opposing offense on a week in, week out basis. But at this point, there's too much turnover. There's too much unknown. There's too many new faces for me to be able to project exactly what West Virginia is going to be this year. That'll do it for us here at Always College Football. Really appreciate all of you guys for supporting the show as much as you have this offseason. The numbers have gone up through the roof, and we continue to be very appreciative of how we are growing. I mean, we are just trying to cover the sport the best way we know how, and we are grateful to those of you that have acknowledged our hard work and that are continuing to subscribe, continuing to rate, continue to follow the podcast throughout the offseason, and then ultimately when we get into prime time season, when the fall kicks off here, just a few weeks from now. We're not far from it. So for all of us here at Always College Football, continue to keep up with us. We will do tiers for every single league, and we look forward to providing those here in an episode probably coming up any minute now. So just keep it locked in here at Always College Football. For Mark, Jake, Jack, the other Jack, I'm Greg. We hope you have an amazing day. And remember, it's always college football. Hey guys, it's Greg McElroy. Thanks for watching Always College Football. Make sure you like, rate, and subscribe to ESPN's YouTube channel and wherever you listen to your podcasts.